Chapter 52, Daniel. The lab smelled like dust, copper, and old promises. It had been several days since Vivian's message. Her information and his sword training had been consuming. So consuming that, he was thankful he got back to his lab after a particularly grueling few days. Daniel's thank you message was acknowledged, and he got back to it. Daniel stood with his hands behind his back, surveying the arcane sprawl around him. Rows of partially disassembled spell cores lined the far wall, their surfaces inscribed with glyphs that pulsed faintly when disturbed. Cracked crystal arrays, fractured talismans. Scrolls folded into bone lattice cases like overcooked spring rolls. The kind of mess only a failed genius or an obsessed one could call productive. Ethan had been both. Daniel shifted his weight. "So," he said, his voice even, "explain it to me again." Slowly. Ethan, speaking from the back of Daniel's mind like a slightly disappointed professor, replied, "Cultivation is an exploration of the soul through the lens of the body. The path begins with understanding of first the breath, then the body, then the world. The 10 levels of the human realm form the foundation, subdivided into low, mid, and high stages. From there, that's enough," Daniel cut in. "I also noticed you use the term cultivation. I thought that was for barbarians." Ethan paused. Be the change you want in the world, and you asked." "I did. I also asked for clarity, not poetry." There was a rustle as Daniel moved to a wide workbench near the center of the room, brushing a layer of chalk dust from a cracked monoslate. He glanced at the nearest reference scroll, a diagram of the 3 channels of virtuous flow, and exhaled through his nose. "Look," he said, half to Ethan, half to the half-lit chamber. "I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's incoherent. It's tradition. Well, your tradition lacks structure. It's a superstition with better branding." Daniel picked up a monocompass, flicked the dial, and watched as it spun uselessly before shorting out with a puff of violet smoke. He set it aside. "You're trying to tell me that emotion fuels intention, which empowers essence and which awakens form. But that's just another way of saying the soul has to be in the mood before magic works." "It's more than mood, it's jumbled nonsense," Daniel interrupted. "You're not really telling me anything. I'm hearing there are loose inputs, that tempering requires emotional dependencies, that I have to feel my way through this. But one misstep and your essence and your ribcage implodes." He turned, leaning slightly against the edge of the table. "Okay, that's probably an exaggeration. But you get my point. You want to know what this looks like to me? Would it matter if I said no?" And Daniel ignored him. "A blah-blah MacGuffin with a blah-blah system." "What?" Daniel sighed. "You haven't really told me anything. How can I explain this if I have to feel my way through it?" Well, there was silence for a beat. Daniel could almost feel Ethan folding his arms. "Then what would you do differently?" And he gestured toward the surrounding clutter. "We need to approach this completely differently. You have felt your way through this, which is why someone as analytical as you doesn't see the problem. The issue for you is behind you. But set that aside, correct me if I'm wrong. Spell arrays are hard-coded. Every new one needs a certain emotional state when setting. Even the same spell cast by the same person can fail if they're not aligned with their inner truth." Ethan considered it. "Yeah, well, kinda. See, there's too much mysticism, too much guesswork. I want to at least try to establish baseline rules." "I agree, but I don't know how much you can establish as absolute baseline," Ethan said in response. "The variation comes from the caster, even if there is some uniformity with the array itself." Daniel shook his head. "In engineering, that's called brittle logic. In medicine, it's called malpractice. In cultivation, it's called growth and discovery. In cultivation, it's called guesswork. Just because you guys are good at it doesn't mean it's optimal." He crossed the room and stopped in front of a larger ritual plate built into the floor, an octagonal slab lined with power runes and embedded with 7 glow points. A common focus array, at least by noble standards. Daniel crouched beside it and ran a finger along one of the glyphs. "You keep talking about understanding the soul," he said. "About resonance, intention, cycles. But all of that assumes the user is reliable. That emotion is stable. That thought isn't distorted. You've built a system based on human feeling, and then punish the user when the feeling changes. Intention matters. Of course it does. But it's not enough." He stood again, straightened his sleeves, and let the idea fall into shape. "Intent," he said aloud, "should be an input, not the foundation of the whole spellwork. It goes back to our conversation with the Maginot idiots. The foundation of the magic system is flawed. Ethan was quiet. Daniel looked toward the far corner of the lab, where a faded blueprint of an old execution lattice hung like a forgotten memory. A basic diagram input nodes, array stabilizer, output pattern filter. He pointed toward it. Well, that's what we need. A logic gate. A separation layer. A spell isn't a dwarven steam machine, Daniel. I'm not saying, wait, there are dwarves here? Where? What are they like? Are they all bearded? Daniel, Ethan said, cutting across his musing. Focus. I will ask why you care so much about dwarves later. Daniel sighed. So then I talked about the Maginet and building a foundation, but I think our problem might be even more fundamental. Spellcasters seem to build spells like artists, like their performance. Everything depends on mood, feelings, and memory. But then the activation of that spell gets tangled with those things, which affects the reliability of the overall spell. Having a battle spell be affected by a high-stress situation like death or war is probably not a good thing. So what is it that you're thinking? Pretty sure I know, but I'd like to hear you articulate it. You need abstraction. Layers in the spell work. Something that takes the mess of human emotion and keeps it out of the overall process. We need mana to act as a source. An array acts as instruction bridging power and source into a usable format without risking detonation. He moved back to the table and grabbed a charcoal stick from the tray. In fast, precise strokes, he sketched a simple grid. 3 tiers: input, process, output. Around the top level, he began to etch rough glyphs, ones that didn't require emotional focus to sustain. Raw, silent forms, intent neutral. What are you drawing? The first pass, Daniel said, of a compiler. He underlined one section. We'll write the spell in logic glyphs. Try to keep it clean. Then pass it through an emotion-filtered channel that's insulated, so the actual mana casting doesn't corrupt the base code. We talked about it on the hardware and structure level for the Maginet. That was too big to start with. I cannot believe I didn't see it before. We need to apply to the individual spell level, then work our way up there. You're serious, Daniel smirked. You spent your life designing arrays that cracked under pressure. I'm just giving them structure. He stepped back and surveyed the sketch. For the record, he added, I'm not trying to kill cultivation. I'm trying to rebuild it. From the root. Another beat of silence. Then Ethan said with a sigh that was almost impressed, You're not doing anything I didn't want or even try to do. You're going to need better tools if we're going to accomplish this. You're going to need the stuff we brought back in the notebook. Daniel nodded. We're going to need better materials too for the overall project. We're going to have to build the hardware from the ground up. In reviewing the materials, in trying to find something that can handle mana and traditional power sources, I think we start with sky glass. Then, blood copper. We have soul glass shards. We can have Nathan order the other supplies on the list. So sky glass, that is great. That at least is easy. I know a place, Ethan said. Daniel smiled faintly, already gathering the needed scraps from the table. I expect nothing less. Chapter 53, Daniel. The lab had gone quiet again, save for the low crackle of a rune light flickering in the corner. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor, sleeves rolled up. Chalk dust on his fingers, glyph diagrams sketched all around him in a looping mess of intention and irritation. Ethan was quiet for once, watching. Daniel exhaled slowly, then reached for the next old component, a broken core array etched with burned sigils, clearly overloaded by emotional resonance. He had the idea down. Hardware, operating system, and then software for the overall program, and then somehow integrate the system into a person. Daniel thought of all the manhwas and cultivation novels he'd read back home. Rarely is the system explained, let alone designed by the main character. Why did I get such a sucky transmigration story? Lame. Ethan was still quiet, watching. Daniel set the cracked mana array aside and reached for the next relic, another failed barrier circuit. Its spell matrix blackened from burnout. These all collapsed for the same reason, Daniel muttered. No shielding, no buffering. No way to separate the spell's structure from the caster's state. Spell gets contaminated. Yes, the spell is the contamination. No wonder casting is such an advanced skill. The practitioner basically has to do everything from scratch over and over again. Daniel leaned back, drawing 3 clean lines across the slate beside him. We need to divide the process. I thought a single layer might be enough. I'm not so sure now. How about this? Intent, structure, execution, each in its own layer. That's a casting sequence. How's that any different? No. Like a computer system from my world, Daniel corrected. Hardware to create and carry the signal. A language to define it. And a runtime to make sure it behaves, can interact with the user, be changed, and debugged. He tapped each word as he wrote it. Hardware. Glyph syntax. Software system. He stood and began pacing slowly between the work tables, collecting fragments, burnt conduits, corroded gems, notes from Ethan's college years written in overlapping glyph dialects and increasingly frenzied shorthand. First, Daniel said, holding up a cracked core, we need hardware, something that can handle high mana throughput without reacting to every flicker of emotional charge. Skyglass, Ethan offered without hesitation, from collapsed cloudstone. Doesn't carry emotional imprint unless you force it. High-end noble families use it in long-range scrying tools. Stable, cold, rare. Daniel jotted it on the slate. Skyglass conduits, emotionally inert, perfect for base signal routing. He moved to the next tier. A language, he said half to himself. Not glyphs layered on intuition, not poetic metaphors. A clean, closed system symbolic logic. Glyphs that represent intent, not channel it. Modular and stackable. He picked up Ethan's old language binder, the one that looped back on itself in increasingly unreadable spirals. This was close, he admitted, but you encoded emotional tags into the root logic. It collapsed under contradiction. I thought spellcasting had to feel something. I think this is what I was trying to do in my past life. Daniel shook his head. Emotion is noise. This needs to be written like code, like a simple letter. Static, silent, repeatable. We'll create a syntax from null rune glyphs, clean forms, with no resonance. Build a logic tree that can run without spiritual input. He tapped the middle of the diagram and labeled it. GLA, Glyph Logic Assembly. Fine, Ethan said. Now you've got your hardware, as you've got your code. How do you inject the commands or the intent you desire? Daniel drew the third tier slowly. This is the shell, the layer that takes the compiled logic and handles casting cleanly, safely, and in isolation. The spell engine, the OS. He paused. Then quietly, Silica. Naming it already? Daniel smiled faintly. Always name the thing you're afraid to break. He added another note. Silica, their operating system. Modular, resilient, filters emotional bleed, sandboxes intent. No one's ever built anything like this, Ethan said. No need here, Daniel agreed. Because they didn't need it. He looked at the ruined spell fragments lining the bench. Tools for mages who'd grown up trusting chaos to behave. I do. He stepped back and looked over the slate. No spell runes, no activation glyphs, nothing that glowed. Just architecture. A map. One that represents not power but stability. And now they knew what it would take to build it. Chapter 54, Daniel. Getting to their first destination had been more of a negotiation than Daniel liked to admit. The moment he mentioned traveling near a Fifth Ring's outer border territory, known more for old scars than current oversight, both his father-in-law and Nathan tried to shut it down. Nathan, of course, had immediately offered to go with him, but he was already committed to a seasonal pairing Circle 1 of those heavily sanctioned social mixers, where noble heirs were expected to perform, flirt, and quietly audition for marriage prospects under the eyes of their elders. Daniel felt horrible for Nathan. Trying to make a connection in those circumstances was a daunting task. Daniel waved it off. This is training, he'd said. If I'm going to honor the Lee name, I have to do it on my own. That's what strength looks like, doesn't it? He wasn't sure Li Zhenhua believed him, but the man had let him go, which meant Daniel had no backup, no chaperone, and no one watching his flank, but the voice in his head. And despite it being his suggestion, Ethan didn't like where they were going either. Go figure. It took him a couple of days of travel to get to his first destination, a mountainous area in the northeastern region of the empire. The hike was brutal but strangely cathartic. It took them a while to find what they were looking for, despite Ethan being there before. The ridgeline narrowed as they approached the final marker, a jagged pillar of stone, half swallowed by ivy and moss. Daniel brought the field transport to a stop and climbed out into thin mountain air, the silence hitting like a physical presence. Below them, the slope dropped away sharply, revealing nothing but mist and black pine forest stretching for miles. Wind funneled through the valley, cold and thin, carrying no birdsong, just emptiness. The path forward was narrow, too narrow for the transport. Daniel adjusted the pack on his shoulder and started down on foot. Ethan was quiet for a while but couldn't help but fill the quiet. You sure you want to do this first? We are here and we need the sky glass, Daniel replied. If the framework's going to work, we start here. A beat passed. I don't like this place, Daniel snorted. That makes two of us. The tree line ended like a broken thought. Daniel stepped out onto shattered stone, wind tugging at his coat as the slope gave way to a gaping, lightless scar in the mountain black rock sheared wide by time, mana, or something worse. There was a distinct lack of signs or markers of the sky glass mine. It was just quiet. Too quiet. Reflectively, he put his hand on Chinglin's silence. The metal of the hilt was comforting. Eventually, he found the entrance. The mine had no name, not anymore. That in itself said everything. He crouched by the opening and ran a hand over the carved threshold. The glyphs etched into the stone were old, deep-channel warding runes, faded with erosion but still faintly resonant. Someone tried to seal it, he murmured. Someone tried to forget it, Ethan corrected. The Academy found this by accident, but they buried it because it didn't make sense. The Academy pretended it was a failed expansion tunnel. It wasn't. Daniel nodded slowly. Same thing in a world like this. He placed his palm against the center sigil, channeling a trickle of mana into the groove. The rune shivered, then flashed once soft white, like a pulse under skin before dimming. The stone shifted. The ground beneath him trembled faintly as the entrance unsealed. No clang, no rumble. Just a smooth exhale, like the mountain had been holding its breath for years. Daniel stepped forward. The tunnel swallowed him whole. The temperature dropped immediately, but not in degrees, but in presence and pressure. That didn't seem like a good sign. The air was thick with memory, the kind of heaviness that settled in the lungs and stayed there, silent and unexhaled. Every sound he made came back late, softened by spiritual interference. The walls weren't stone, not anymore. Veins of mana-stained crystal pulsed just beneath the surface, faint and irregular, like the mine itself had a heartbeat. This was an old spirit channeling site, Ethan said quietly. Before refined intent, before mana logic. Miners worked by pure instinct and raw mana. They didn't even have tools, just resonance and mana manipulation. Let me guess, Daniel muttered. They tuned themselves to the rock. They let the rock tune them, Daniel frowned. What does that even mean? Not really sure, honestly. The path sloped inward, deeper than it should have. No support beams, no rail paths. Just rough-hewn steps etched into a spiral that wound toward the vein's heart. Dust coated every surface. Occasionally, Daniel passed collapsed segments of the old sky rail twisted alloy, half fused into the walls by some long-forgotten discharge. Ethan guided him gently, whispering turns and side branches best avoided. Left forks a dead channel. Collapsed after the third year. We sealed it to stop the feedback. Daniel didn't ask what kind. Half an hour later, the air shifted again. Finer dust, sharper resonance. Daniel slowed as the tunnel widened into the first chamber. He paused just inside the arch, letting his eyes adjust. Even in low light, the crystal veins were brighter here, glowing faintly in rhythm. The cavern branched off in a lot of directions. This is where they stopped mining, Ethan said. The mana was too strong. It started changing the miners' heart rates. Their dreams. Daniel walked slowly to the far wall. At the base of the chamber, embedded in a ripple of stone like a half-buried fossil, a streak of sky glass shimmered faintly. It was moon-pale, smooth, and cool, not glowing like mana crystals, but catching every light and echoing it softly without distortion. Daniel knelt, opened his satchel, and pulled out the sensor stone that he and Ethan had put together before they left their lab in the city. One short shot of mana laden with intent activated the device. The device sent out a pulse of mana like a radio wave that was intense enough that Daniel could feel even if he couldn't see the mana. A reading popped up into midair, a set of projections. Daniel let out a slow breath. I cannot believe that worked, especially since we threw it together so haphazardly. You were right. The signal bounces clean like it's hitting a perfect mirror. Only because of Skyglass' unique properties, Ethan said quietly. Skyglass doesn't amplify or distort its filters. We used to use it in optics and soul-script mirrors. It never lies. Daniel nodded. Now it makes sense. It's not a battery. It's a conduit. No noise, no memory. Should be perfect for our hardware component. Something that won't bleed or imprint, but can carry mana and help filter the intent. That and a filtering array on something as simple as black iron should get us there. He switched tools, drawing a soft-line mana pen from his sleeve and sketching a small glyph across the shard's base. This is definitely not my favorite place, Ethan said. Let's get the sky glass and get out of here. We should also look for and think about alternatives if we have to build to scale. Daniel pulled the extraction tool free, its prongs etched with dampening runes, its core lined with null-threaded coils. He didn't cut, he coaxed. Null-aligned mana flowed from the tool, sinking to the sky-glass rhythm. The shard shimmered once, then dulled, like it had fallen asleep. Daniel twisted gently. A perfect shard slid free into the containment sleeve. The chamber exhaled relief, like something that had been waiting for permission to let go. Daniel locked the sleeve and stood slowly. That's one. Ethan didn't reply right away. The walls hummed faintly, alive and listening. And Chapter 55, Daniel. Daniel adjusted the weight of the shard case across his back as he left the first chamber. The walls of the mine were quieter now, but not silent. They pulsed in waves, not with sound, but with emotion, like memory. The resonance wasn't random. As Daniel moved, he felt the light shift with him, echoing not his mana, but his thoughts. He walked more slowly, focusing on his breathing. The farther he descended, the more alive the walls felt. He came to a junction he hadn't noticed on their way in, a narrow passage nearly hidden by collapsed scaffolding. The glyphs above the arch were fractured but legible. Prototype access, private wing. Daniel hesitated. Ethan? I don't recognize this path, Ethan said slowly. They must have expanded it after I left, or someone else started working here. Daniel pushed inside. The tunnel was rougher, less polished. It twisted and veered without the logical flow of the earlier passages. The walls here felt raw, as if carved in a hurry by desperate hands. Abandoned tool crates lay scattered along the edges, half covered in stone dust that seemed to shimmer with something unwholesome. The air grew thick with a cold, cloying dread. It tasted like ash and swallowed screams. That thought came unbidden, but felt true all the same. He moved deeper, and the passage suddenly widened. His breath caught. The path spilled into a vast, unlit cavern, barely visible in the faint, ambient glow of untouched sky glass veins high on the walls. It was massive, had to be a mile or more across. It was also silent, not in a peaceful way, but in a terrifying way, like a maniac with a knife about to jump out and stab you in the face. What's your favorite scary movie? Daniel murmured. What was that? Ethan asked. Daniel shook his head. Nothing. He stared into the gloom and took in the horrific truth. This had been a settlement. That much was obvious. Dilapidated structures. Crude shelters, half collapsed, were scattered across the uneven floor. Broken tools, long rotted remnants of fabric, and twisted, rusted implements lay strewn amid piles of shattered stone. And amidst it all, countless skeletons. Piles of them. Not buried, not even neatly arranged. Just broken, strewn everywhere, completely intertwined without rhythm or reason. Broken swords lay beside fractured bones. The signs of a brutal, absolute slaughter were undeniable. An entire community utterly destroyed without regard or mercy. A suffocating wave of despair rolled over Daniel from the raw emotional weight clinging to the air. He thought he was going to be sick. This wasn't a place of quiet echoes. It was a vast, open grave of pure, concentrated suffering. Well, what the hell? He whispered, his voice a ragged gasp. Ethan was silent, a rare, chilling stillness in Daniel's mind. The sheer scale of the terror seemed to overwhelm even him. Daniel's gaze drifted across the horror, drawn by an unnerving flicker. Deep within the cavern, nestled among the ruins of what might have been a central communal space, glowed a vein of sky glass, unlike any he had seen. It was impossibly pure, radiating a soft, crystalline blue light that seemed to draw all the ambient dread toward it, condensing it an ultra-pure vein. He took a step toward it, drawn by morbid fascination. As he did, the air clenched. A sudden, non-physical pressure slammed into his mind. It was raw, unadulterated emotion, an unbearable resentment that burned with furious anger. It wasn't his. Ethan! Daniel staggered back, clutching his head. Do you know what the hell is going on? What is that? It was theirs. The victims. The slaughtered. Ethan's voice was strained, barely a whisper in his mind. The sky glass doesn't absorb. It pushes. It collects and condenses, I think. It condensed their hatred, their despair, their fear. It's all gathered here. The assault intensified. Images flashed across Daniel's mind, not seen with his eyes, but felt with his very being. A sudden, overwhelming terror, the piercing agony of a blade, the despair of utter loss. They were fragments, imprints of final moments, devoid of any individual soul. He began to realize this was the raw, screaming resonance of total annihilation, of people who had just been living off the grid. Was this bad luck or something else? The emotions brought more images, tall figures with horns and burning red eyes. Demons, beings that delighted in slaughter. If these were demons, and if this suffering was what awaited the people of Ethan's world, Then these things had to go back to whatever hellish pit they had crawled out of. Daniel wouldn't allow it. He was going to destroy any chance of this happening. He fell to his knees, gasping, the resentment of thousands pressing down on him, turning his own thoughts to lead. The air crackled with condensed anguish. He felt the phantom pressure of desperate, futile struggles, broken promises, utter, soul-consuming fear. This isn't just an echo, Ethan said. It's a storm, a psychic maelstrom of pure suffering. I'll try to shield you from it. Try to get to the central vein. You can do that? What's at the central vein? I guess we'll see if I can help and probably find the center of all this. Daniel had to reach the sky glass, just as Ethan suggested. It was the purest conduit, the epicenter of this agony. It might be the only way to sever the connection. With a desperate, primal urge, Daniel forced himself forward, crawling toward the glowing pillar. Still, the whispers pushed against his consciousness. Mom, please don't go. Help? I don't want to die. What are you doing? Why do I burn? Death, pain, betrayal. God's why. Every inch was agony, every breath a battle against waves of pure resentment, fear, and loss. The air vibrated with the silent screams of the long dead. His shaking hand reached for his extraction tool. He knew what this place was now. It wasn't just a mine for rare materials. It had been a home, a refuge, a place hidden away, one that hadn't remained hidden for long. Now, it was a monument to the true horror of the demon sect and invasion, so absolute it erased even lingering spirits, leaving only the raw, undying stain of emotion. And the sky glass in its purity held it all locked in the surrounding rock. The sky glass vein, still glowing with terrifying purity, pulsed with blindingly bright mana. A current seemed to react to the crystal. Talk about bad luck. You've got to crack that thing, Ethan said, his voice distant. I'm shielding your mind, but the malice in here is getting out of control. I don't know how long I can hold on. Daniel reached the pillar and watched it pulse. He didn't have time, didn't have the energy. He drew his sword. Kingland's silence responded the moment it touched his hand. The blade pushed back the resentment and fear as it glowed with bright light. Daniel didn't hesitate. He injected as much mana as he could into Chingland's silence. It was sloppy and unrefined. Nathan would have been appalled. He mustered his focus and stabbed the blade into the vein. A pulse of clean energy erupted in a strange pressure wave. Then, without warning, the sky glass shattered. The air rang like breaking crystal, then shimmered and softened. Daniel let out a deep breath. Damn, was all he said.